Welcome to the SGV Master Key, a show where you will hear personal stories of triumph over failures and how others successfully navigated the unique landscape that is the San Gabriel Valley. What makes us different? Well, just like you, we have chosen the San Gabriel Valley for our home or businesses or both. We believe it is the people and small businesses that make this community great, and we love to share their stories with you. We always encourage your questions and feedback, and you can find all of our contact information at sgvmasterkey.com. Here are the hosts for the show, Russell Mono and Scott Warmuth.
All right. Welcome back to another episode of the SGV Master Key. We're here again with Scott, and we're going to pick up where we left off last time, and that was you had been elected as a city official, right?
Yeah, when I was 18, I was elected as a city councilman in the town of Lake Forest Park, Washington, a suburb of Seattle.
So you sort of just nonchalantly mentioned when you were 18, but that's quite the feat for an 18-year-old.
I think as I was talking last time, I told you I was always trying to better myself, to be ahead of the game. And when I was 18, I felt I could conquer anything, I could do anything. And being elected a city councilman was not something that was out of my range of ability. And to me, it was just sort of a continuation of what I had been doing all my life.
So you've shared with me how you got elected, but can you share that story with the listeners?
Well, from the beginning, I sat at lunch one day and I said, I just want to be a city councilman. I think I should be a city councilman. And that was I was 17 at the time, but my 18th birthday was within a week or two. And so as soon as I could, which is when I turned 18, I registered with the city, and I was a candidate. It involved mostly for me doorbelling, going door to door. I was already known in the community for a couple of reasons. One, I'd been a paper boy for years, and so a lot of these voters were actually people I had serviced on my paper route. So they all knew me, but our name was known in the community through my father and through, a family of five. We were always involved in activities. So the name was known to people. And also my father had run for office, a different type of office, not city councilman, a few years before, well, probably 9 years before that, although he didn't win that election, and he was running for state senate or state representative, actually. It brought, recognition to the name. So it was not too difficult for me to win because I was not running against an incumbent. The position was open. And with, the aggressive, I was a bit aggressive in terms of doorbelling and getting out and meeting people and telling them what I was running for and why. And it was, at the end of it, it was a pretty easy victory.
What do you take from that experience?
As long as you have a plan, and you carry it out, that you can achieve anything you want. But that's kind of my answer has a lot of levels to it, because I grew up in a different time than today, for instance, and in a different situation, and it could be very complicated, but I happen to have been born at the time that if you were a white male, you could accomplish anything you wanted. If you were not a white male, things might have been a little more difficult. But I was born into a time of our country's history, which was, I was born in 1955, grew up in the 60s, where there was this feeling of unlimited ability to achieve whatever you wanted to achieve. I kind of rode that wave.
So that's not a typical life for an 18-year-old. Do you feel like you had missed out on typical 18-year-old stuff, like hanging out with your friends and doing that kind of stuff?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if I look back today, I would say I don't think that was a good thing to do. I wouldn't do that again, knowing today what I know. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it to other people, and I wouldn't have done it again because it's kind of an unnatural leap from high school to your next stage, where I probably would have been better served to have had what you might call a more normal life.
So how long were you a councilman?
It was a 2-year term, and I was living with my parents because I had to live in that city. So it was a 2-year term. At the end of that, I moved out, went on to do other things. I didn't want to stay where I was, so I moved into Seattle after I was done, which was the city right next to Lake Forest Park, and it just pursued other things.
What did you pursue?
At that time, I was working as a reporter at a newspaper. Actually, I was doing many things. I mean, I remember thinking at one point when I was 18, 19, 20, I had 2 full-time jobs. I was a city councilman in addition to 2 full-time jobs, and I was going to community college. So I was just doing a lot of things. My full-time jobs were working at newspapers and magazines, where I was a reporter or a writer. I was going to the local community college, taking classes there.
So you've shared with me that you've kept a journal for most of your life.
Right.
You really enjoy writing, then?
Yes, I do. I just don't do enough of it, though.
What did you do at the newspaper?
Well, I started at a weekly newspaper in the city of Bothell, Washington, as a sports reporter. I'm sorry, at that I was 17 years old, right out of high school, and they hired me as a general news reporter. But I also was a sports editor at a newspaper in Redmond, Washington, which is famous now because that's the city Microsoft is headquartered in. But at that time, it was more of a little country town. And so these were twin newspapers. So there were 2 newspapers. I was a general reporter at one and a sports editor at the other one. And sports editor for a small town newspaper like that was basically covering high school sports, little league, this type of thing. Community-based sports, not major league sports.
And then what did you go to from there, from the newspaper?
Well, I then went to a daily newspaper in Seattle called the Seattle Post-Intelligencer, which was a Hearst newspaper owned by the Hearst Corporation. And I was a sports reporter initially there, not full-time, but more a summer reporter. I would work summers only in the sports department at that newspaper. And gradually I would do other kinds of work there, including working on what you call the the copy desk in the general news department. I would write headlines, or maybe I would write small minor articles. But I also worked for a newspaper, for a magazine, and I would do feature articles for a magazine. So the magazine was kind of like my thrill, because I could choose what I wanted to write about. It was a weekly magazine in Seattle. It was a monthly. And I could choose my topics. So I always chose to write about prominent people in the community. It was kind of my way of getting to know them, because I had an in. I was a writer, and I wanted to do an article about them. So, I remember my first big thrill was when I was probably 18 or 19, and I was still living at home, and I was writing an article for a member of the Seattle Sonics, and he actually went on to become, at one point, he was the winningest most coach in the NBA, in the history of the NBA, and I think he's still number 3. But his name was Lenny Wilkins, and he was the either a player. I think he was the player coach at that time of the Sonics, and so he was a big star. And I mentioned last time, the Sonics were the first pro team in Seattle. So if you were a Sonic, you were a big deal. And I used to, as a 7th, 8th grader, I would keep score of every Sonic game. I would listen to it on the radio, and I never missed a game. I would listen to the whole game and track the number of points and rebounds and so on for each player. And so anyway, one day I was at home. I had put out the word that I wanted to do an article about Lenny Wilkins. One day the phone rang, and my dad answered the phone, and he said, and he called me. He said, "Scott, Lenny Wilkins is calling for you." And it was just, to me, it was like the biggest thrill that you could ever have. It would be like, Kobe Bryant is calling for you, that kind of thing. So, but I would do it like Bill Russell. Bill Russell then became the coach of the Sonics, and Bill Russell was a huge NBA star, one of the original big stars of the Boston Celtics. And I never did an article about him, because he was very difficult to deal with, and but I took a picture of him one time when I was doing an article about someone else on the Sonics, and he kind of glared.
I think that's still his personality today.
Yes, very, very prickly, yes. The interesting thing about Bill Russell is that my very close friend wrote a book. He was my very close friend, Blaine Johnson, one of the most influential persons in my life. I met him when I worked at the Seattle Post-Intelligencer. Blaine was covering the Sonics. That was his beat for the Post-Intelligencer. So he would travel with the Sonics. He, covered every game for the team, for the newspaper. And so he got to know Bill Russell real well, and he got Bill Russell fired because he wrote several critical articles about Bill Russell and pointing out his sort of deficiencies in the way he was running the team, and they fired him as coach of the Sonics.
Wow.
Yeah. My friend Blaine wrote a book chronicling his one of his seasons traveling with the Sonics. So he, was with them every day. He covered them. This book kind of was a sort of an analysis of what happened that season, and they fired Russell after that.
Wow, that's Russell's not a fan of his then, for sure.
Oh, definitely not.
So, for the listener of this show, we're trying to give them a little bit more in depth of who you are, and who are some of the mentors, or who are some of the people who guided you along the way to get there?
Yeah. So first, of course, was my father first. He was the person I always wanted to be. What he did in his life, I wanted to do in my life. And so, my father definitely, if I go through my life, there were, numerous teachers at various times, but the biggest impact people were, besides my father, would be Blaine Johnson, would be a good friend of mine, Tim Healy, who I went to live in New York with when I moved to New York. He was a high school friend. In New York, a big influence was, I don't know how to describe him. He was my professor. He was my teacher. He was my mentor. He was a Jesuit priest. And he had been the president of Gonzaga University. And he then went on to found another college in California. And then he went to New York for 2 years to operate a program called Year in New York, which he based on a program he had started at Gonzaga University called Year in Florence, Italy, where students from Gonzaga would go to Florence and study for a year. So instead of Florence, though, it was New York City. And so his name was Father Jack Leary.
This is the Jesuit priest.
Yes, he was a Jesuit priest, and he was a huge influence on me. Dick Carbray, who was a professor at the University of Washington, was a very big influence on me at about that same time in my late teens, early 20s. So those were the biggest impactful people, I would say, up to that age, up to the early 20s. I worked at the New York Times for a short time, and the former managing editor of the New York Times was Clifton Daniel. And Clifton Daniel was married to the daughter of President Truman. So Clifton Daniel had been the managing editor of the New York Times, and he was the dashing, romantic, foreign overseas reporter for the New York Times during the Second World War in Europe. So he was kind of this a dashing, romantic person, I guess. This movie star-like person who, back in, say, the 40s, to be a foreign correspondent for a newspaper like the New York Times, you were just at the top of your game. And he ended up marrying President Truman's daughter, Margaret. And he was my supervisor at the New York Times for this short period of time I worked there. And by that time, he had retired as managing editor and was working on a special project, a book project, and I assisted him on that. And he was a big impact, a short-term impact, but a big impact, because he was probably, at that point, the most celebrated person I had ever met. I mean, his father-in-law was the President of the United States, not at that time, but had been the President of the United States. And for me, I was in New York. I worked for Rupert Murdoch, who was he's still around. He's kind of a famous media mogul. But I worked at his newspaper, the New York Post, and I worked at the New York Times. And I just felt, in 2 years living in New York, and then I had my mentor, Father Leary, again, I felt I was at the top of the world. I mean, I had moved up from Seattle, where I had sort of developed myself and was at the top of my game, I felt. But I thought Seattle was not big enough for me. And the only place to go was New York. And I went to New York, and within 2 years, I just found myself, by the time I was 23, I had worked at the best newspapers in the world, and for the best, most renowned people in the world. And I just felt, wow, I just felt like there was nothing I couldn't do. Yeah, I felt on top of the world. I mean, this was the feeling I had from age 17 to 23 in New York. So it was 6 years where I just thought I could accomplish anything.
I felt like I had a lot of great mentors and coaches along my path growing up. And looking back, I can see, that I got a little bit from each of them. Can you look back and see that? Is there a common thread among the people who've shaped your life along that way?
Well, I think Father Leary, for instance, in New York, was an intellectual, and we would sit and read books and talk about books and talk about ideas. And he had this very Socratic way of talking. So, he would lead you somewhere, but you had to be the impetus behind it. So he would ask questions that would make you think. And so a conversation with him, I always felt, was like I was sitting at the foot of Socrates and learning and taking in this incredible wisdom and knowledge. So that was Father Leary. I always called him Jack. So that was Jack. He was this incredible mind and wisdom. And as a Jesuit priest, he had to mix intellect with participating in the real world. It's not an ivory tower. He was really very influential in sort of training my mind, I think. Because I was not well trained. My mind was not well trained. I had gone to high school and didn't really care about high school. As an elementary and, middle grade student, I, probably always got 4.0 or straight A's or whatever. By the time I got to high school, I didn't really care. I didn't really put much effort into it, and I was kind of treated special in a way anyway, so I didn't need to push myself, and I felt, I don't need to take the standard path. So I didn't go to college right out of high school. I don't think I ever learned in the standard way, and my mind was not well trained. And I think to this day, it's not well trained.
Not well trained.
I don't think it's well trained. It's not a mind that has done a formal set of study. It's a mind that has been educated through experience and through seeking, but not through a formal educational process. I feel quite lacking in a lot of ways. I can't, quote things out of books as easily as I should be able to, or I can't follow kind of a formula way of thinking, and I wish I could, and I wish I had, right out of high school, gone directly into a good school and had my mind trained in a good way. But
your alternative way of thinking has served you well, though, right, throughout your life and
I've always, from the time I was a kid of some age, maybe 10, 11, 12, I felt I always had to take care of myself, whether financially, yes, always. Seeking out things, I had to be the lead in it. I wasn't putting myself in a position where it was being fed to me. I was always out looking and seeking and trying to find. I've always felt to this very day that I have to take care of myself. I have to find a way to take care of myself and the people who rely on me.
There's some sort of attachment description for that, for a young person to have that. I don't know it off the top of my head, but I want to find out.
Oh, yeah.
Because I've read it before, yeah. It's where a young person, because those are not responsibilities for an 11-year-old.
Yeah, right.
Or even maybe a 15-year-old, 16-year-old.
But there are people that are put into that position where they have to, they have to do it. And some of that was, I was put into a position where I had to because, my family went into a period of time where, we suffered financially. And so if I couldn't take care of myself, I couldn't have anything. And part of it is just, I think, just this, my nature, which is to try to seek out things or try to find things. And I'm a little too self-reliant. I should be more trusting and reliant on other people, but I'm afraid to put myself, it's a weakness. I would call it a weakness.
What happens after New York?
So in my life, I say there are 3 bold acts I've taken. One was to move from Seattle to New York. The next one was these were actually consecutive acts. The second bold act was to go into the Peace Corps, where I served in South Korea. This was an opportunity for me to leave my country, go to another country, and immerse myself in it and try to understand it, but as well try to understand myself. So there is a great, great writer, James Joyce, who felt he had to leave his religion, leave his country, and leave his family in order to fully develop. And he went from Ireland to Switzerland and other places in Europe. But he needed to leave those things to fully understand himself and to fully develop himself. And so I was influenced by that as well. So I felt I needed to leave the United States and go live somewhere else.
This was in your early or mid-20s.
I was 23 when I went to Korea. I was put in a place where I had to speak Korean. I couldn't speak English. And I had to live, as a Korean, not as a Korean, but as a Korean does, in a small town in Korea. So I didn't stay the whole 2 years that is normally a Peace Corps service period. I left within my first year, late in the first year, because I found Korea, although not nearly as developed as it is today, it was at a stage of developing. And when I went into the Peace Corps, I expected a more non-developed situation. So it was a little bit not to my liking. Korea was a great experience, but it was just a little more developed. A lot of Peace Corps people think of Africa or some places in Asia that are, way underdeveloped. But South Korea was just a little more than I wanted. And so I left within the first year.
So you were still on somewhat a journey to discover about yourself and the things that...
Yes.
What did South Korea teach you?
I can't tell you what it taught me, but I can tell you the after effects of it. I became very close to a number of people, fellow Peace Corps people, or this is what I got out of it. I'd always wanted to go to college, right? My ideal would have been a small college where you get close to some of your fellow students. It's not a college that's too big that you're lost in it, but you can develop really close friendships in this college atmosphere. And so I've always sought that, and I think in the Peace Corps I had that because I was with about 30 other volunteers, Peace Corps volunteers. We went through language class together and culture class together, and we became very close. And I think that provided me with this thing that I had wanted, which was that, opportunity to bond with some similar like-thinking people. Mm-hmm. And it was probably the first time I had ever done that. So I that's what I got from that experience, as well as, there was a test. I was kind of testing myself. I probably failed the test. I was testing myself to see if I could do it, if I could actually go live somewhere and not speak English and be in another culture. But you see, I left before I finished it, so I think I failed the test.
I mean, you obviously were living in a different country, so that brings a whole experience just on that alone.
Oh yeah, I mean, it was really. I was separated. So when I went to my site, because what you first do, at least at that time, you go through 3 months of training in a city or a central location. All the Peace Corps people of your group are there at the same time going through training, language and culture, and just learning about the country and so on. So after 3 months, they send you to your site where you're to live for the next 2 years. And so my site was a small little town up near the DMZ, near North Korea. And they say I was the first Peace Corps volunteer ever to go there, maybe even the first, American to live there, as non-military. I mean, there was definitely no other American in that area, and no other foreigner of any type. And so, it was a great experience to be in that situation. I was assigned to a healthcare clinic. I was there to help with tuberculosis control. What I did sometimes was actually go house to house with Korean workers and collect sputum and take it back to the lab. And, from there I had nothing to do with it. But it was very enlightening. I mean, I learned so much about how Korean people live. I mean, I was living with them. I would have to go to the public bath, and take, my bath in a public bath in Korea, just like everyone else had to. I ate the same food. I mean, you were not given special treatment. So,
did you pick up the language?
I was pretty good at it. Yeah, I was one of the best in my group. Yeah, I mean, I can still read and write it perfectly because it's a simple alphabet. But it'd be very hard for me to have any kind of real conversation at this point. I mean, I know the words. I could go to Korea, for instance, stay there for a month, and I'd be pretty good at being able to communicate. But I was good at the time. I mean, I basically had to speak Korean every day. If I didn't, I couldn't communicate with anyone. So.
And you obviously like the food now because we've had the Korean barbecue quite often. But
yeah, I've always thought Korean is my favorite food of anything. I love Korean food, and you'll find some kimchi right in my refrigerator right now.
Did it take time for you to adjust?
Yes, kimchi took time to adjust to, but now, I mean, as I say, I have it. I eat it. I could eat it every day. I love kimchi. Yeah, you had to adjust. I mean, some of the food, like I would live with a family, so I would see it being made, or I would smell it being made, and some of the smells were hard to deal with, but the food that came from that smell, is among my favorite food. So,
right. Well, I want to learn what happens next after your time in the Peace Corps, but let's take a quick break and we'll come right back.
The legal process can be intimidating. You don't know where to start and you're unsure of what to expect. The attorneys and staff at the law offices of Scott Warmuth have been serving the San Gabriel Valley for over 35 years, helping people just like you navigate through the legal process and ensuring you're treated fairly. You can find them at law888.com or call 626-282-6868. That's 626-282-6868.
All right, we're back. So, Scott, you were just sharing with us your experience in Korea. Where did you go from there?
So that was what I considered my third bold act. I went to law school.
Which law school did you attend?
I went to University of San Diego, and it's a beautiful campus on a hilltop in San Diego, a private campus, private school, Catholic school.
Did you feel ready for that transition?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. That's one of the reasons I left Korea early. I just wanted to go to law school.
And what was the driving force in that?
A couple of different things. When I was living in Seattle, 18, 19 years old, and I had done some volunteer work for the Attorney General of the state of Washington, and I worked in the consumer protection. This was volunteer work, so I was not a job. It was just, I would do it maybe once or twice a week. And I just felt, wow, you can really help people. You can, people would call in to the Attorney General's office in the department that I was working and say, I'm getting nowhere. Somebody cheated me, or, the store won't help me, give me what they said they would give me, or whatever kind of consumer problem they were having, they would call in. And so we would take it as a case, and then we would try to resolve it for them informally. But, I saw the power that you could have to help people as an attorney. So that was part of it. Part of it was the intellectual challenge. Had nothing to do with, like wanting to be an attorney, but just the intellectual challenge of going through a program like that for 3 years. So I went to law school, and I always say this quite clearly, because I wanted to learn law. I didn't go because I wanted to be an attorney. I didn't go because I wanted to make money. I didn't go because I wanted a position. I went because I just wanted to study law, just purely. That's all I wanted. And that's what I try to tell my kids and try to tell anybody, but particularly young people, is do what you want to do, and don't have any ulterior motives or reasons. Just study what you want to study. If you want to study art history and love what you're studying, and you shouldn't go to college to think, can I get a job out of this? Or, is it going to put me in a certain position? Just whatever you do in life, do it because you want to do that particular thing. And I wanted to learn, I wanted to just study law. I honestly never wanted to be a lawyer. I mean, I had been affected and influenced by my work at the Attorney General's office, but if I were to be an attorney, I thought it would probably be something like that, but I really didn't think I wanted to be an attorney. I thought my future would be, maybe I'd be a diplomat, maybe I'd work for the Department of State, maybe I'd be a teacher, maybe I'd, be a professor, maybe I'd be a judge, but I never really could think of myself as a lawyer. But it didn't matter. I went to law school for a different reason, and I loved it. That's why I loved law school, because I was doing what I wanted to do, which was, two parts to it. One was a discipline. I was able to set a discipline. So I moved to San Diego. I was living, I'd come back from Korea and was staying in Seattle, my home, for about 6 months. And then after I had been accepted into the law school and school started, so it was about a 6-month time frame maybe, I moved to San Diego. I found an apartment. I bought a bicycle. That's how I commuted, up a hill to San Diego, to the campus. And every day I left at 7:45 exactly, and got there by 8 when the library opened. And I would go into the library, and classes started. Classes may have started at 8, so maybe I didn't go to the library on the day classes started, but if Monday through Sunday, every day of the week, I was there at 8 o'clock to either go to the library or go to class, and I would not leave until 6, when I would then, ride my bike home, have dinner, and I would try to do something a little bit relaxing. But I wanted to be sort of like in a monastery, I wanted to, my life, really, that was first year of law school, was Monday through Sunday, 8 o'clock law school, study, learn. But I loved it, I mean, it was hard, but I loved what I was doing, and it was a discipline. And this was the other thing that I had been seeking for so long, was to have a discipline, because my life, as I said, was a little bit, undisciplined. I mean, I did a lot of wonderful things and I was very successful, but I had never gone to school and disciplined myself in this way. And this was also a test. So I felt I failed in Korea, but I passed in law school.
Yeah, I was going to say that route is very different, right? From people out of high school, they'll go to a 4-year college, they apply to law school, then go there for 3 years, and then start working at a firm.
Yes,
and
right.
your route was very different.
Yeah, a little more circuitous, I guess is the word. But I mean, in the sense that I was a little bit older, I was a couple of years older than most of the people. I was 25 when I started, and some of the students were 22, 23. So I was there because I wanted to be there, and I knew exactly what I wanted to do, and I did it, The first year was the most disciplined. Second and third year were less disciplined, and they could be less disciplined because of the way law school is. It didn't have to be. First year is the difficult year.
When we started talking about this subject, you said that you loved it.
Oh yeah, I loved it. I was doing what I had always wanted to do in my life, which was I was going to a regular school. I was going to a real school, for the first time in my life. In New York, my schooling was like unparalleled and great, but my schooling was I would sit like this in the living room of a Jesuit priest and we would talk about books. That was my education, It was not like what I always thought was college, where you're, as I said, you're maybe with other people and you're, getting to, go through regular programs and so on.
The way you keep saying that, it's like almost to normalize you or normalize your life.
That's exactly what I wanted to do. I wanted to tell myself that I could live a normal life too. I could accomplish something in the world that most people know. Because I was accomplishing things, but it was in I was in my own little world, I had created my own path, but I wanted to see, can I make it like everybody else makes it? And so that was the test.
That's really interesting insight, because that's an external valuation of you rather than you, right? Saying like, okay, I know I can do all these things. I don't need to, prove it to anybody or to accomplish anything that someone else can say. But here you're actually seeking that in some sense.
Yes, yeah, definitely. Because I never felt I was part of anything. Right. It was always just me on my own.
Right. For the listeners, if you have any questions about that journey, please drop us a line. You can find us on the website.
And another thing is that we'll be starting soon a separate podcast as well.
Right.
About myself and my journeys, and that will be available at some time.
Yes, and more in detail, right? Where you're going to share some of your journal entries and go through that part of your life and really share with our listeners or the listeners of that program the lessons that you have, right?
Right.
So thanks for tuning in. Thanks for listening and spending this time with us. And we'll have another guest for you coming up soon. But again, you can find us at sgvmasterkey.com, on YouTube, and wherever you get your podcast.
Yep. Thank you. Okay. And it's nice to be able to let people know, how you really feel, how a person really feels. So.
Sure. Because until now, you're just a voice on the other end, right?
Just a face or a voice, yeah.
Right. So next time we'll go into, I guess it's your professional career, right?
After that, right.
Yeah.
After law school. Yeah.
All right. Thanks for tuning in.
Thanks.
Thanks for checking out another episode of the SGV Master Key. You can find the full back catalog of the SGV Master Key at sgvmasterkey.com and wherever you get your podcasts. This show was produced and edited by Russell Mono and Victoria Allers of Kind Monster Productions. Thanks again for listening or watching. We'll see you again real soon in the next episode.
Nice mother. No, kind mother.